Sutra 25. In the Master is the perfect seed of omniscience. The soul of the Master is in essence one with the Oversoul, and therefore partaker of the Oversoul's all wisdom and all power. All spiritual attainment rests on this, and is possible because the soul and the Oversoul are one. Sutra 26. He is the teacher of all who have gone before, since he is not limited by time. From the beginning, the Oversoul has been the teacher of all souls, which, by their entrance into the Oversoul, by realizing their oneness with the Oversoul, have inherited the kingdom of the light. For the Oversoul is before time, and time, father of all else, is one of his children. Sutra 27. His word is Om. Om, the symbol of the three-in-one, the three worlds in the soul, the three times, past, present, future in eternity, the three divine powers, creation, preservation, transformation, in the one being, the three essences, immortality, omniscience, joy, in the one spirit. This is the word, the symbol, of the Master and Lord, the perfected spiritual man. Sutra 28. Let there be soundless repetition of Om, and meditation thereon. This has many meanings in ascending degrees. There is first the potency of the word itself, as of all words. Then there is the manifold significance of the symbol, as suggested above. Lastly, there is the spiritual realization of the high essences thus symbolized. Thus we rise step by step to the eternal. Sutra 29. Thence come the awakening of interior consciousness and the removal of barriers. Here again, faith must be supplemented by works. The life must be led as well as studied before the full meaning can be understood. The awakening of spiritual consciousness can only be understood in measure as it is entered. It can only be entered where the conditions are present: purity of heart, and strong aspiration, and the resolute conquest of each sin. This, however, may easily be understood, that the recognition of the three worlds as resting in the soul leads us to realize ourselves and all life as of the soul, that as we dwell not in past, present, or future, but in the eternal, we become more at one with the eternal, that as we view all organization, preservation, mutation, as the work of the Divine One, we shall come more into harmony with the One, and thus remove the barrier in our path toward the light. In the second part of the first book, the problem of the emergence of the spiritual man is further dealt with. We are led to the consideration of the barriers to his emergence, of the overcoming of the barriers, and of certain steps and stages in the ascent from the ordinary consciousness of practical life to the finer, deeper, radiant consciousness of the spiritual man. End of Book 1, Sutras 1 to 29 of the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, the Book of the Spiritual Man. An interpretation by Charles Johnston. Recording by Maggie Russell, New York, New York. Book 1, Sutras 30 to 51 of the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, the Book of the Spiritual Man. An interpretation by Charles Johnston. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Maggie Russell, New York, New York. The Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, the Book of the Spiritual Man. An interpretation by Charles Johnston. Book 1, Sutras 30 to 51. Sutra 30. The barriers to interior consciousness, which drive the psychic nature this way and that, are these: sickness, inertia, doubt, light-mindedness, laziness, intemperance, false notions, inability to reach a stage of meditation or to hold it when reached. We must remember that we are considering the spiritual man as enwrapped and enmeshed by the psychic nature, the emotional and mental powers, and as unable to come to clear consciousness, unable to stand and see clearly because of the psychic veils of the personality. 9 of these are enumerated, and they go pretty thoroughly into the brute toughness of the psychic nature. Sickness is included rather for its effect on the emotions and mind, since bodily infirmity, such as blindness or deafness, is no insuperable barrier to spiritual life, and may sometimes be a help, as cutting off distractions. It will be well for us to ponder over each of these 9 activities, thinking of each as a psychic state, a barrier to the interior consciousness of the spiritual man. Sutra 31. Grieving, despondency, bodily restlessness, the drawing in and sending forth of the life breath also contribute to drive the psychic nature to and fro. The first 2 moods are easily understood. We can well see how a sudden psychic condition, flagrantly opposed to the pure and positive joy of spiritual life, would be a barrier. The next, bodily restlessness, is in a special way the fault of our day and generation. When it is conquered, mental restlessness will be half conquered too. The next 2 terms, concerning the life breath, offer some difficulty. The surface meaning is harsh and irregular breathing. The deeper meaning is a life of harsh and irregular impulses. Sutra 32. Steady application to a principle is the way to put a stop to these. The will, which, in its pristine state, was full of vigor, has been steadily corrupted by self-indulgence, the seeking of moods and sensations for sensation's sake. Hence come all the morbid and sickly moods of the mind. The remedy is a return to the pristine state of the will, by vigorous, positive effort, or, as we are here told, by steady application to a principle. The principle to which we should thus steadily apply ourselves should be one arising from the reality of spiritual life. Valorous work for the soul, in others as in ourselves. Sutra 33. By sympathy with the happy, compassion for the sorrowful, delight in the holy, disregard of the unholy, the psychic nature moves to gracious peace. When we are wrapped up in ourselves, shrouded with the cloak of our egotism, absorbed in our pains and bitter thoughts, we are not willing to disturb or strain our own sickly mood by giving kindly sympathy to the happy, thus doubling their joy, or by showing compassion for the sad, thus halving their sorrow. We refuse to find delight in holy things, and let the mind brood in sad pessimism on unholy things. All these evil psychic moods must be conquered by strong effort of will. This rending of the veils will reveal to us something of the grace and peace which are of the interior consciousness of the spiritual man. Sutra 34. Or peace may be reached by the even sending forth and control of the life breath. Here again we may look for a double meaning. First, that even and quiet breathing which is a part of the victory over bodily restlessness. Then, the even and quiet tenor of life, without harsh or dissonant impulses, which brings stillness to the heart. Sutra 35. Faithful, persistent application to any object, if completely attained, will bind the mind to steadiness. We are still considering how to overcome the wavering and perturbation of the psychic nature, which make it quite unfit to transmit the inward consciousness and stillness. We are once more told to use the will, and to train it by steady and persistent work, by sitting close to our work, in the phrase of the original. Sutra 36. As also will a joyful, radiant spirit. There is no such illusion as gloomy pessimism, and it has been truly said that a man's cheerfulness is the measure of his faith. Gloom, despondency, the pale cast of thought, are very amenable to the will. Sturdy and courageous effort will bring a clear and valorous mind. But it must always be remembered that this is not for solace to the personal man, but is rather an offering to the ideal of spiritual life, a contribution to the universal and universally shared treasure in heaven. Sutra 37. Or the purging of self-indulgence from the psychic nature. We must recognize that the fall of man is a reality, exemplified in our own persons. We have quite other sins than the animals, and far more deleterious, and they have all come through self-indulgence, with which our psychic natures are soaked through and through. As we climbed downhill for our pleasure, so must we climb up again for our purification and restoration to our former high estate. The process is painful, perhaps, yet indispensable. Sutra 38. Or a pondering on the perceptions gained in dreams and dreamless sleep. For the Eastern sages, dreams are, it is true, made up of images of waking life, reflections of what the eyes have seen and the ears heard. But dreams are something more, for the images are in a sense real, objective on their own plane. And the knowledge that there is another world, even a dream world, lightens the tyranny of material life. Much of poetry and art is such a solace from dreamland. But there is more in dream, for it may image what is above, as well as what is below. Not only the children of men, but also the children by the shore of the immortal sea that brought us hither, may throw their images on this magic mirror. So, too, of the secrets of dreamless sleep with its pure vision, in even greater degree. Sutra 39. Or meditative brooding on what is dearest to the heart. Here is a thought which our own day is beginning to grasp, that love is a form of knowledge, that we truly know anything or any person by becoming one therewith in love. Thus, love has a wisdom that the mind cannot claim, and by this hearty love, this becoming one with what is beyond our personal borders, we may take a long step toward freedom. Two directions for this may be suggested: the pure love of the artist for his work, and the earnest, compassionate search into the hearts of others. Sutra 40. Thus he masters all, from the atom to the infinite. Newton was asked how he made his discoveries. By intending my mind on them, he replied. This steady pressure, this becoming one with what we seek to understand, whether it be atom or soul, is the one means to know. When we become a thing, we really know it, not otherwise. Therefore, live the life to know the doctrine. Do the will of the Father, if you would know the Father. Sutra 41. When the perturbations of the psychic nature have all been stilled, then the consciousness, like a pure crystal, takes the color of what it rests on, whether that be the perceiver, perceiving, or thing perceived. This is a fuller expression of the last sutra, and is so lucid that comment can hardly add to it. Everything is either perceiver, perceiving, or the thing perceived, or, as we might say, consciousness, force, or matter. The sage tells us that the one key will unlock the secrets of all three, the secrets of consciousness, force, and matter alike. The thought is that the cordial sympathy of a gentle heart, intuitively understanding the hearts of others, is really a manifestation of the same power as that penetrating perception whereby one divines the secrets of planetary motions or atomic structure. Sutra 42. When the consciousness, poised in perceiving, blends together the name, the object dwelt on, and the idea, this is perception with exterior consideration. In the first stage of the consideration of an external object, the perceiving mind comes to it preoccupied by the name and idea conventionally associated with that object. For example, in coming to the study of a book, we think of the author, his period, the school to which he belongs. The second stage, set forth in the next sutra, goes directly to the spiritual meaning of the book, setting its traditional trappings aside and finding its application to our own experience and problems. The commentator takes a very simple illustration, a cow, where one considers in the first stage the name of the cow, the animal itself, and the idea of a cow in the mind. In the second stage, one pushes these trappings aside and, entering into the inmost being of the cow, shares its consciousness, as do some of the artists who paint cows. They get at the very life of what they study and paint. Sutra 43. When the object dwells in the mind, clear of memory pictures, uncolored by the mind, as a pure, luminous idea, this is perception without exterior consideration. We are still considering external, visible objects. Such perception as is here described is of the nature of that penetrating vision whereby Newton, intending his mind on things, made his discoveries, or that whereby a really great portrait painter pierces to the soul of him whom he paints, and makes that soul live on canvas. These stages of perception are described in this way, to lead the mind up to an understanding of the piercing soul vision of the spiritual man, the immortal. Sutra 44. The same two steps, when referring to things of finer substance, are said to be with, or without, judicial action of the mind. We now come to mental or psychical objects, to objects in the mind. It is precisely by comparing, arranging, and superposing these mind images that we get our general notions or concepts. This process of analysis and synthesis, whereby we select certain qualities in a group of mind images, and then range together those of like quality, is the judicial action of the mind spoken of. But when we exercise swift divination upon the mind images, as does a poet or a man of genius, then we use a power higher than the judicial, and one nearer to the keen vision of the spiritual man. Sutra 45. Subtle substance rises in ascending degrees, to that pure nature which has no distinguishing mark. As we ascend from outer material things which are permeated by separateness, and whose chief characteristic is to be separate, just as so many pebbles are separate from each other, as we ascend first to mind images, which overlap and coalesce in both space and time, and then to ideas and principles, we finally come to purer essences, drawing ever nearer and nearer to unity. Or we may illustrate this principle thus. Our bodily external selves are quite distinct and separate, in form, name, place, substance. Our mental selves, of finer substance, meet and part again, in perpetual concussion and interchange. Our spiritual selves attain true consciousness through unity, where the partition wall between us and the highest, between us and others, is broken down, and we are all made perfect in the one. The highest riches are possessed by all pure souls only when united. Thus we rise from separation to true individuality in unity. Sutra 46. The above are the degrees of limited and conditioned spiritual consciousness, still containing the seed of separateness. In the 4 stages of perception above described, the spiritual vision is still working through the mental and psychical. The inner genius is still expressed through the outer personal man. The spiritual man has yet to come completely to consciousness as himself, in his own realm, the psychical veils laid aside. Sutra 47. When pure perception without judicial action of the mind is reached, there follows the gracious peace of the inner self. We have instanced certain types of this pure perception. The poet's divination, whereby he sees the spirit within the symbol, likeness in things unlike, and beauty in all things. The pure insight of the true philosopher, whose vision rests not on the appearances of life, but on its realities, or the saint's firm perception of spiritual life and being. All these are far advanced on the way. They have drawn near to the secret dwelling of peace. Sutra 48. In that peace, perception is unfailingly true. The poet, the wise philosopher, and the saint not only reach a wide and luminous consciousness, but they gain certain knowledge of substantial reality. When we know that we know. For we have come to the stage where we know things by being them, and nothing can be more true than being. We rest on the rock, and know it to be rock, rooted in the very heart of the world. Sutra 49. The object of this perception is other than what is learned from the sacred books, or by sound inference, since this perception is particular. The distinction is a luminous and inspiring one. The scriptures teach general truths concerning universal spiritual life and broad laws, and inference from their teaching is not less general. But the spiritual perception of the awakened seer brings particular truth concerning his own particular life and needs, whether these be for himself or others. He receives defined, precise knowledge exactly applying to what he has at heart. Sutra 50. The impress on the consciousness springing from this perception supersedes all previous impressions. Each state or field of the mind, each field of knowledge, so to speak, which is reached by mental and emotional energies, is a psychical state, just as a mind picture of a stage with the actors on it is a psychical state or field. When the pure vision, as of the poet, the philosopher, the saint, fills the whole field, all lesser views and visions are crowded out. This high consciousness displaces all lesser consciousness. Yet, in a certain sense, that which is viewed as part, even by the vision of a sage, has still an element of illusion, a thin psychical veil, however pure and luminous that veil may be. It is the last and highest psychic state. Sutra 51. When this impression ceases, then, since all impressions have ceased, there arises pure spiritual consciousness, with no seed of separateness left. The last psychic veil is drawn aside, and the spiritual man stands with unveiled vision, pure, serene. End of Book 1, Sutras 30 to 51 of the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, the Book of the Spiritual Man. An interpretation by Charles Johnston. Recording by Maggie Russell, New York, New York. Introduction to Book 2 of the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, the Book of the Spiritual Man. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Maggie Russell, New York, New York. The Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, the Book of the Spiritual Man. An interpretation by Charles Johnston. Introduction to Book 2. The first book of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras is called the Book of Spiritual Consciousness. The second book, which we now begin, is the Book of the Means of Soul Growth. And we must remember that soul growth here means the growth of the realization of the spiritual man, or, to put the matter more briefly, the growth of the spiritual man and the disentangling of the spiritual man from the wrappings, the veils, the disguises laid upon him by the mind and the psychical nature, wherein he is enmeshed, like a bird caught in a net. The question arises, by what means may the spiritual man be freed from these psychical meshes and disguises, so that he may stand forth above death in his radiant eternalness and divine power? And the second book sets itself to answer this very question, and to detail the means in a way entirely practical and very lucid, so that he who runs may read, and he who reads may understand and practice. The second part of the second book is concerned with practical spiritual training, that is, with the earlier practical training of the spiritual man. The most striking thing in it is the emphasis laid on the commandments, which are precisely those of the latter part of the Decalogue, together with obedience to the master. Our day and generation is far too prone to fancy that there can be mystical life and growth on some other foundation. On the foundation, for example, of intellectual curiosity or psychical selfishness. In reality, on this latter foundation, the life of the spiritual man can never be built, nor indeed anything but a psychic counterfeit, a dangerous delusion. Therefore Patanjali, like every great spiritual teacher, meets the question, "What must I do to be saved?" with the age-old answer, "Keep the commandments." Only after the disciple can say, "These have I kept," can there be the further and finer teaching of the spiritual rules. It is therefore vital for us to realize that the yoga system, like every true system of spiritual teaching, rests on this broad and firm foundation of honesty, truth, cleanness, obedience. Without these, there is no salvation, and he who practices these, even though ignorant of spiritual things, is laying up treasure against the time to come. End of introduction to Book 2 of the Yoga-Sutras of Patanjali, the Book of the Spiritual Man, an interpretation by Charles Johnston. Recording by Maggie Russell, New York, New York. Book 2, Sutras 1 to 27, of the Yoga-Sutras of Patanjali, the Book of the Spiritual Man, an interpretation by Charles Johnston. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Maggie Russell, New York, New York. The Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, the Book of the Spiritual Man, an interpretation by Charles Johnston. Book 2, Sutras 1 to 27. Sutra 1. The practices which make for union with the soul are fervent aspiration, spiritual reading, and complete obedience to the Master. The word which I have rendered fervent aspiration means primarily fire, and in the Eastern teaching it means the fire which gives life and light, and at the same time the fire which purifies. We have therefore, as our first practice, as the first of the means of spiritual growth, that fiery quality of the will which enkindles and illumines, and at the same time the steady practice of purification, the burning away of all known impurities. Spiritual reading is so universally accepted and understood that it needs no comment. The very study of Patanjali's sutras is an exercise in spiritual reading and a very effective one, and so with all other books of the soul. Obedience to the Master means that we shall make the will of the Master our will, and shall conform in all ways to the will of the divine, setting aside the wills of self, which are but psychic distortions of the one divine will. The constant effort to obey, in all the ways we know and understand, will reveal new ways and new tasks, the evidence of new growth of the soul. Nothing will do more for the spiritual man in us than this, for there is no such regenerating power as the awakening spiritual will. Sutra 2. Their aim is to bring soul vision and to wear away hindrances. The aim of fervor, spiritual reading, and obedience to the Master is to bring soul vision and to wear away hindrances. Or, to use the phrase we have already adopted, the aim of these practices is to help the spiritual man to open his eyes, to help him also to throw aside the veils and disguises, the enmeshing psychic nets which surround him, tying his hands as it were, and bandaging his eyes. And this, as all teachers testify, is a long and arduous task, a steady uphill fight, demanding fine courage and persistent toil. Fervor, the fire of the spiritual will, is, as we said, twofold. It illumines, and so helps the spiritual man to see, and it also burns up the nets and meshes which ensnare the spiritual man. So with the other means, spiritual reading and obedience. Each in its action is twofold, wearing away the psychical and upbuilding the spiritual man. Sutra 3. These are the hindrances: the darkness of unwisdom, self-assertion, lust, hate, attachment. Let us try to translate this into terms of the psychical and spiritual man. The darkness of unwisdom is, primarily, the self-absorption of the psychical man, his complete preoccupation with his own hopes and fears, plans and purposes, sensations and desires, so that he fails to see, or refuses to see, that there is a spiritual man, and so doggedly resists all efforts of the spiritual man to cast off his psychic tyrant and set himself free. This is the real darkness, and all those who deny the immortality of the soul, or deny the soul's existence, and so lay out their lives wholly for the psychical mortal man and his ambitions, are under the power of darkness. Born of this darkness, this psychic self-absorption, is the dogged conviction that the psychic personal man has separate, exclusive interests which he can follow for himself alone. And this conviction, when put into practice in our life, leads to contest with other personalities, and so to hate. This hate, again, makes against the spiritual man, since it hinders the revelation of the high harmony between the spiritual man and his other selves, a harmony to be revealed only through the practice of love, that perfect love which casts out fear. In like manner, lust is the psychic man's craving for the stimulus of sensation, the din of which smothers the voice of the spiritual man, as, in Shakespeare's phrase, the cackling geese would drown the song of the nightingale. And this craving for stimulus is the fruit of weakness, coming from the failure to find strength in the primal life of the spiritual man. Attachment is but another name for psychic self-absorption, for we are absorbed not in outward things, but rather in their images within our minds. Our inner eyes are fixed on them, our inner desires brood over them, and we blind ourselves to the presence of the prisoner, the enmeshed and fettered spiritual man. Sutra 4. The darkness of unwisdom is the field of the others. These hindrances may be dormant, or worn thin, or suspended, or expanded. Here we have really two sutras in one. The first has been explained already. In the darkness of unwisdom grow the parasites, hate, lust, attachment. They are all outgrowths of the self-absorption of the psychical self. Next we are told that these barriers may be either dormant, or suspended, or expanded, or worn thin. Faults which are dormant will be brought out through the pressure of life, or through the pressure of strong aspiration. Thus expanded, they must be fought and conquered. Or, as Patanjali quaintly says, they must be worn thin, as a veil might, or the links of manacles. Sutra 5. The darkness of ignorance is holding that which is unenduring, impure, full of pain, not the soul, to be eternal, pure, full of joy, the soul. This we have really considered already. The psychic man is unenduring, impure, full of pain, not the soul, not the real self. The spiritual man is enduring, pure, full of joy, the real self. The darkness of unwisdom is, therefore, the self-absorption of the psychical, personal man, to the exclusion of the spiritual man. It is the belief, carried into action, that the personal man is the real man, the man for whom we should toil, for whom we should build, for whom we should live. This is that psychical man of whom it is said, "He that soweth to the flesh shall of the flesh reap corruption." Sutra 6. Self-assertion comes from thinking of the seer and the instrument of vision as forming one self. This is the fundamental idea of the Sankhya philosophy, of which yoga is avowedly the practical side. To translate this into our terms, we may say that the seer is the spiritual man, the instrument of vision is the psychical man, through which the spiritual man gains experience of the outer world. But we turn the servant into the master. We attribute to the psychical man, the personal self, a reality which really belongs to the spiritual man alone, and so, thinking of the quality of the spiritual man as belonging to the psychical, we merge the spiritual man in the psychical. Or, as the text says, we think of the two as forming one self. Sutra 7. Lust is the resting in the sense of enjoyment. This has been explained again and again. Sensation as, for example, the sense of taste, is meant to be the guide to action. In this case, the choice of wholesome food, and the avoidance of poisonous and hurtful things. But if we rest in the sense of taste, as a pleasure in itself, rest, that is, in the psychical side of taste, we fall into gluttony, and live to eat instead of eating to live. So with the other great organic power, the power of reproduction. This lust comes into being through resting in the sensation and looking for pleasure from that. Sutra 8. Hate is the resting in the sense of pain. Pain comes, for the most part, from the strife of personalities, the jarring discords between psychic selves, each of which deems itself supreme. A dwelling on this pain breeds hate, which tears the warring selves yet further asunder and puts new enmity between them, thus hindering the harmony of the real, the reconciliation through the soul. Sutra 9. Attachment is the desire toward life, even in the wise, carried forward by its own energy. The life here desired is the psychic life, the intensely vibrating life of the psychical self. This prevails even in those who have attained much wisdom, so long as it falls short of the wisdom of complete renunciation, complete obedience to each least behest of the spiritual man, and of the master who guards and aids the spiritual man. The desire of sensation, the desire of psychic life, reproduces itself, carried on by its own energy and momentum, and hence comes the circle of death and rebirth, instead of the liberation of the spiritual man. Sutra 10. These hindrances, when they have become subtle, are to be removed by a countercurrent. The darkness of unwisdom is to be removed by the light of wisdom, pursued through fervor, spiritual reading of holy teachings and of life itself, and by obedience to the master. Lust is to be removed by pure aspiration of spiritual life, which, bringing true strength and stability, takes away the void of weakness which we try to fill by the stimulus of sensations. Hate is to be overcome by love. The fear that arises through the sense of separate, warring selves is to be stilled by the realization of the one self, the one soul in all. This realization is the perfect love that casts out fear. The hindrances are said to have become subtle when, by initial efforts, they have been located and recognized in the psychic nature. Sutra 11. Their active turnings are to be removed by meditation. Here is, in truth, the whole secret of yoga, the science of the soul. The active turnings, the strident vibrations of selfishness, lust, and hate are to be stilled by meditation, by letting heart and mind dwell in spiritual life, by lifting up the heart to the strong, silent life above, which rests in the stillness of eternal love, and needs no harsh vibration to convince it of true being. Sutra 12. The burden of bondage to sorrow has its root in these hindrances. It will be felt in this life, or in a life not yet manifested. The burden of bondage to sorrow has its root in the darkness of unwisdom, in selfishness, in lust, in hate, in attachment to sensation. All these are, in the last analysis, absorption in the psychical self, and this means sorrow, because it means the sense of separateness, and this means jarring discord and inevitable death. But the psychical self will breed a new psychical self, in a new birth, and so new sorrows in a life not yet manifest. Sutra 13. From this root there grow and ripen the fruits of birth, of the lifespan, of all that is tasted in life. Fully to comment on this would be to write a treatise on karma and its practical working in detail, whereby the place and time of the next birth, its content and duration are determined. and to do this the present commentator is in no wise fitted. But this much is clearly understood, that through a kind of spiritual gravitation the incarnating self is drawn to a home and life circle which will give it scope and discipline, and its need of discipline is clearly conditioned by its character, its standing, its accomplishment. Sutra 14. These bear fruits of rejoicing or of affliction, as they are sprung from holy or unholy works. Since holiness is obedience to divine law, to the law of divine harmony, and obedience to harmony strengthens that harmony in the soul, which is the one true joy, therefore joy comes of holiness, comes indeed in no other way. And as unholiness is disobedience, and therefore discord, therefore unholiness makes for pain, and this twofold law is true, whether the cause take effect in this, or in a yet unmanifested birth. Sutra 15. To him who possesses discernment, all personal life is misery, because it ever waxes and wanes, is ever afflicted with restlessness, makes ever new dynamic impresses in the mind, and because all its activities war with each other. The whole life of the psychic self is misery, because it ever waxes and wanes, because birth brings inevitable death, because there is no expectation without its shadow, fear. The life of the psychic self is misery, because it is afflicted with restlessness, so that he who has much finds not satisfaction, but rather the whetted hunger for more. The fire is not quenched by pouring oil on it, so desire is not quenched by the satisfaction of desire. Again, the life of the psychic self is misery, because it makes ever new dynamic impresses on the mind, because a desire satisfied is but the seed from which springs the desire to find like satisfaction again. The appetite comes in eating, as the proverb says, and grows by what it feeds on. And the psychic self, torn with conflicting desires, is ever the house divided against itself, which must surely fall. Sutra 16. This pain is to be warded off before it has come. In other words, we cannot cure the pains of life by laying on them any balm. We must cut the root, absorption in the psychical self. So it is said, there is no cure for the misery of longing, but to fix the heart upon the eternal. Sutra 17. The cause of what is to be warded off is the absorption of the seer in things seen. Here again we have the fundamental idea of the Sankhya, which is the intellectual counterpart of the Yoga system. The cause of what is to be warded off, the root of misery, is the absorption of consciousness in the psychical man and the things which beguile the psychical man. Their cure is liberation. Sutra 18. Things seen have as their property manifestation, action, inertia. They form the basis of the elements and the sense powers. They make for experience and for liberation. Here is the whole philosophy of life. Things seen, the total of the phenomena, possess as their property manifestation, action, inertia, the qualities of force and matter in combination. These, in their grosser form, make the material world. In their finer, more subjective form, they make the psychical world, the world of sense impressions and mind images. And through this totality of the phenomenal, the soul gains experience and is prepared for liberation. In other words, the whole outer world exists for the purposes of the soul, and finds in this its true reason for being. Sutra 19. The grades or layers of the three potencies are the defined, the undefined, that with distinctive mark, that without distinctive mark. Or, as we might say, there are two strata of the physical, and two strata of the psychical realms. In each, there is the side of form and the side of force. The form side of the physical is here called the defined. The force side of the physical is the undefined, that which has no boundaries. So in the psychical, there is the form side, that with distinctive marks, such as the characteristic features of mind images, and there is the force side, without distinctive marks, such as the forces of desire or fear, which may flow now to this mind image, now to that. Sutra 20. The seer is pure vision. Though pure, he looks out through the vesture of the mind. The seer, as always, is the spiritual man whose deepest consciousness is pure vision, the pure life of the eternal. But the spiritual man, as yet unseeing in his proper person, looks out on the world through the eyes of the psychical man, by whom he is enfolded and enmeshed. The task is to set this prisoner free, to clear the dust of ages from this buried temple. Sutra 21. The very essence of things seen is that they exist for the seer. The things of outer life, not only material things, but the psychic man also, exist in very deed for the purposes of the seer, the soul, the spiritual man. Disaster comes when the psychical man sets up, so to speak, on his own account, trying to live for himself alone, and taking material things to solace his loneliness. Sutra 22. Though fallen away from him who has reached the goal, things seen have not altogether fallen away, since they still exist for others. When one of us conquers hate, hate does not thereby cease out of the world, since others still hate and suffer hatred. So with other delusions, which hold us in bondage to material things, and through which we look at all material things. When the colored veil of illusion is gone, the world which saw through it is also gone. For now we see life as it is, in the white radiance of eternity. But for others the colored veil remains, and therefore the world thus colored by it remains for them, and will remain till they too conquer delusion. Sutra 23. The association of the seer with things seen is the cause of the realizing of the nature of things seen, and also of the realizing of the nature of the seer. Life is educative. All life's infinite variety is for discipline, for the development of the soul. So passing through many lives, the soul learns the secrets of the world, the august laws that are written in the form of the snow crystal, or the majestic order of the stars. Yet all these laws are but reflections, but projections outward, of the laws of the soul. Therefore, in learning these, the soul learns to know itself. All life is but the mirror wherein the soul learns to know its own face. Sutra 24. The cause of this association is the darkness of unwisdom. The darkness of unwisdom is the absorption of consciousness in the personal life, and in the things seen by the personal life. This is the fall, through which comes experience, the learning of the lessons of life. When they are learned, the day of redemption is at hand. Sutra 25. The bringing of this association to an end, by bringing the darkness of unwisdom to an end, is the great liberation. This is the seer's attainment of his own pure being. When the spiritual man has, through the psychical, learned all life's lessons, the time has come for him to put off the veil and disguise of the psychical, and to stand revealed a king in the house of the Father. So shall he enter into his kingdom, and go no more out. Sutra 26. A discerning which is carried on without wavering is the means of liberation. Here we come close to the pure Vedanta, with its discernment between the eternal and the temporal. St. Paul, following after Philo and Plato, lays down the same fundamental principle. The things seen are temporal, the things unseen are eternal. Patanjali means something more than an intellectual assent, though this too is vital. He has in view a constant discriminating in act as well as thought, of the two ways which present themselves for every deed or choice, always to choose the higher way, that which makes for the things eternal, honesty rather than roguery, courage and not cowardice, the things of another rather than one's own, sacrifice and not indulgence. This true discernment, carried out constantly, makes for liberation. Sutra 27. His illumination is sevenfold, rising in successive stages. Patanjali's text does not tell us what the 7 stages of this illumination are. The commentator thus describes them. First, the danger to be escaped is recognized. It need not to be recognized a second time. Second, the causes of the danger to be escaped are worn away. They need not be worn away a second time. Third, the way of escape is clearly perceived by the contemplation which checks psychic perturbation. Fourth, the means of escape, clear discernment, has been developed. This is the 4-fold release belonging to insight. The final release from the psychic is 3-fold. As 5th of the 7 degrees, the dominance of its thinking is ended. As 6th, its potencies, like rocks from a precipice, follow themselves. Once dissolved, they do not grow again. Then, as 7th, freed from these potencies, the spiritual man stands forth in his own nature as purity and light. Happy is the spiritual man who beholds this 7-fold illumination in its ascending stages. End of Book 2, Sutras 1 to 27 of the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, the Book of the Spiritual Man. An interpretation by Charles Johnston. Recording by Maggie Russell, New York, New York. Book 2, Sutras 28 to 55 of the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, the Book of the Spiritual Man. An interpretation by Charles Johnston. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Maggie Russell, New York, New York. The Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, the Book of the Spiritual Man. An interpretation by Charles Johnston. Book 2, Sutras 28 to 55. Sutra 28. From steadfastly following after the means of yoga, until impurity is worn away, there comes the illumination of thought, up to full discernment. Here we enter on the more detailed practical teaching of Patanjali, with its sound and luminous good sense. And when we come to detail the means of yoga, we may well be astonished at their simplicity. There is little in them that is mysterious. They are very familiar. The essence of the matter lies in carrying them out. Sutra 29. The 8 means of yoga are the commandments, the rules, right poise, right control of the life force, withdrawal, attention, meditation, contemplation. These 8 means are to be followed in their order, in the sense which will immediately be made clear. We can get a ready understanding of the first 2 by comparing them with the commandments, which must be obeyed by all good citizens, and the rules which are laid on the members of religious orders. Until one has fulfilled the first, it is futile to concern oneself with the second. And so with all the means of yoga. They must be taken in their order. Sutra 30. The commandments are these: non-injury, truthfulness, abstaining from stealing, from impurity, from covetousness. These 5 precepts are almost exactly the same as the Buddhist commandments: not to kill, not to steal, not to be guilty of incontinence, not to drink intoxicants, to speak the truth. Almost identical is St. Paul's list: thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not covet. And in the same spirit is the answer made to the young man having great possessions, who asked, "What shall I do to be saved?" and received the reply, "Keep the commandments." This broad general training, which forms and develops human character, must be accomplished to a very considerable degree before there can be much hope of success in the further stages of spiritual life. First the psychical, and then the spiritual. First the man, then the angel. On this broad, humane, and wise foundation does the system of Patanjali rest. Sutra 31. The commandments, not limited to any race, place, time, or occasion, universal, are the great obligation. The commandments form the broad general training of humanity. Each one of them rests on a universal spiritual law. Each one of them expresses an attribute or aspect of the self, the eternal. When we violate one of the commandments, we set ourselves against the law and being of the eternal, thereby bringing ourselves to inevitable confusion. So the first steps in spiritual life must be taken by bringing ourselves into voluntary obedience to these spiritual laws, and thus making ourselves partakers of the spiritual powers, the being of the eternal. Like the law of gravity, the need of air to breathe, these great laws know no exceptions. They are in force in all lands, throughout all times, for all mankind. Sutra 32. The rules are these: purity, serenity, fervent aspiration, spiritual reading, and perfect obedience to the Master. Here we have a finer law, one which humanity as a whole is less ready for, less fit to obey. Yet we can see that these rules are the same in essence as the commandments, but on a higher, more spiritual plane. The commandments may be obeyed in outer acts and abstinences. The rules demand obedience of the heart and spirit, a far more awakened and more positive consciousness. The rules are the spiritual counterpart of the commandments, and they have finer degrees for more advanced spiritual growth. Sutra 33. When transgressions hinder, the weight of the imagination should be thrown on the opposite side. Let us take a simple case, that of a thief, a habitual criminal, who has drifted into stealing in childhood, before the moral consciousness has awakened. We may imprison such a thief, and deprive him of all possibility of further theft, or of using the divine gift of will. Or we may recognize his disadvantages, and help him gradually to build up possessions which express his will, and draw forth his self-respect. If we imagine that, after he has built well, and his possessions have become dear to him, he himself is robbed, then we can see how he would come vividly to realize the essence of theft and of honesty, and would cleave to honest dealings with firm conviction. In some such way does the great law teach us. Our sorrows and losses teach us the pain of the sorrow and loss we inflict on others, and so we cease to inflict them. Now as to the more direct application. To conquer a sin, let heart and mind rest not on the sin, but on the contrary virtue. Let the sin be forced out by positive growth in the true direction, not by direct opposition. Turn away from the sin and go forward courageously, constructively, creatively, in well-doing. In this way the whole nature will gradually be drawn up to the higher level, on which the sin does not even exist. The conquest of a sin is a matter of growth and evolution, rather than of opposition. Sutra 34. Transgressions are injury, falsehood, theft, incontinence, envy, whether committed or caused or assented to, through greed, wrath, or infatuation, whether faint or middling or excessive, bearing endless fruit of ignorance and pain. Therefore must the weight be cast on the other side. Here are the causes of sin: greed, wrath, infatuation, with their effects, ignorance and pain. The causes are to be cured by better wisdom, by a truer understanding of the self, of life. For greed cannot endure before the realization that the whole world belongs to the self, which self we are. Nor can we hold wrath against one who is one with the self, and therefore with ourselves. Nor can infatuation, which is the seeking for the happiness of the all in some limited part of it, survive the knowledge that we are heirs of the all. Therefore, let thought and imagination, mind and heart throw their weight on the other side, the side not of the world, but of the self. Sutra 35. Where non-injury is perfected, all enmity ceases in the presence of him who possesses it. We come now to the spiritual powers, which result from keeping the commandments, from the obedience to spiritual law, which is the keeping of the commandments. Where the heart is full of kindness, which seeks no injury to another, either in act or thought or wish, this full love creates an atmosphere of harmony, whose benign power touches with healing all who come within its influence. Peace in the heart radiates peace to other hearts, even more surely than contention breeds contention. Sutra 36. When he is perfected in truth, all acts and their fruits depend on him. The commentator thus explains: if he who has attained should say to a man, "Become righteous," the man becomes righteous. If he should say, "Gain heaven," the man gains heaven. His word is not in vain. Exactly the same doctrine was taught by the Master who said to his disciples, "Receive ye the Holy Ghost. Whosoever sins ye remit, they are remitted unto them. And whosoever sins ye retain, they are retained." Sutra 37. Where cessation from theft is perfected, all treasures present themselves to him who possesses it. Here is a sentence which may warn us that, beside the outer and apparent meaning, there is in many of these sentences a second and finer significance. The obvious meaning is that he who has wholly ceased from theft, in act, thought, and wish, finds buried treasures in his path, treasures of jewels and gold and pearls. The deeper truth is that he who in every least thing is wholly honest with the spirit of life, finds life supporting him in all things, and gains admittance to the treasure house of life, the spiritual universe. Sutra 38. For him who is perfect in continence, the reward is valor and virility. The creative power, strong and full of vigor, is no longer dissipated, but turned to spiritual uses. It upholds and endows the spiritual man, conferring on him the creative will, the power to engender spiritual children instead of bodily progeny. An epoch of life, that of man the animal, has come to an end. A new epoch, that of the spiritual man, is opened. The old creative power is superseded and transcended. A new creative power, that of the spiritual man, takes its place, carrying with it the power to work creatively in others for righteousness and eternal life. One of the commentaries says that he who is attained is able to transfer to the minds of his disciples what he knows concerning divine union and the means of gaining it. This is one of the powers of purity. Sutra 39. Where there is firm conquest of covetousness, he who has conquered it awakes to the how and why of life. So it is said that, before we can understand the laws of karma, we must free ourselves from karma. The conquest of covetousness brings this rich fruit, because the root of covetousness is the desire of the individual soul, the will towards manifested life. And where the desire of the individual soul is overcome by the superb, still life of the universal soul welling up in the heart within, the great secret is discerned, the secret that the individual soul is not an isolated reality, but the ray, the manifest instrument of the life, which turns it this way and that until the great work is accomplished, the age-long lesson learned. Thus is the how and why of life disclosed by ceasing from covetousness. The commentator says that this includes a knowledge of one's former births. Sutra 40. Through purity, a withdrawal from one's own bodily life, a ceasing from infatuation with the bodily life of others. As the spiritual light grows in the heart within, as the taste for pure life grows stronger, the consciousness opens toward the great secret places within, where all life is one, where all lives are one. Thereafter, this outer manifested fugitive life, whether of ourselves or of others, loses something of its charm and glamour, and we seek rather the deep infinitudes. Instead of the outer form and surroundings of our lives, we long for their inner and everlasting essence. We desire not so much outer converse and closeness to our friends, but rather the quiet communion with them in the inner chamber of the soul, where spirit speaks to spirit, and spirit answers, where alienation and separation never enter, where sickness and sorrow and death cannot come. Sutra 41. To the pure of heart comes also a quiet spirit, one pointed thought, the victory over sensuality, and fitness to behold the soul. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God, who is the supreme soul, the ultimate self of all beings. In the deepest sense, purity means fitness for this vision, and also a heart cleansed from all disquiet, from all wandering and unbridled thought, from the torment of sensuous imaginings. And when the spirit is thus cleansed and pure, it becomes at one in essence with its source, the Great Spirit, the primal life. One consciousness now thrills through both, for the psychic partition wall is broken down. Then shall the pure in heart see God, because they become God. Sutra 42. From acceptance, the disciple gains happiness supreme. One of the wise has said, accept conditions, accept others, accept yourself. This is the true acceptance, for all these things are what they are through the will of the higher self, except their deficiencies, which come through thwarting the will of the higher self, and can be conquered only through compliance with that will. By the true acceptance, the disciple comes into oneness of spirit with the overruling soul. And since the own nature of the soul is being, happiness, bliss, he comes thereby into happiness supreme. Sutra 43. The perfection of the powers of the bodily vesture comes through the wearing away of impurities, and through fervent aspiration. This is true of the physical powers, and of those which dwell in the higher vestures. There must be first purity, as the blood must be pure before one can attain to physical health. But the absence of impurity is not in itself enough, else would many nerveless ascetics of the cloisters rank as high saints. There is needed further a positive fire of the will, a keen vital vigor for the physical powers, and something finer, purer, stronger, but of kindred essence, for the higher powers. The fire of genius is something more than a phrase, for there can be no genius without the celestial fire of the awakened spiritual will. Sutra 44. Through spiritual reading, the disciple gains communion with the divine power on which his heart is set. Spiritual reading meant, for ancient India, something more than it does with us. It meant, first, the recital of sacred texts, which, in their very sounds, had mystical potencies, and it meant a recital of texts which were divinely emanated, and held in themselves the living, potent essence of the divine. For us, spiritual reading means a communing with the recorded teachings of the masters of wisdom, whereby we read ourselves into the master's mind, just as through his music one can enter into the mind and soul of the master musician. It has been well said that all true art is contagion of feeling, so that through the true reading of true books, we do indeed read ourselves into the spirit of the masters, share in the atmosphere of their wisdom and power, and come at last into their very presence. Sutra 45. Soul vision is perfected through perfect obedience to the master. The sorrow and darkness of life come of the erring personal will, which sets itself against the will of the soul, the one great life. The error of the personal will is inevitable, since each will must be free to choose, to try, and fail, and so to find the path. And sorrow and darkness are inevitable, until the path be found, and the personal will made once more one with the greater will, wherein it finds rest and power, without losing freedom. In his will is our peace, and with that peace comes light. Soul vision is perfected through obedience. Sutra 46. Right poise must be firm and without strain. Here we approach a section of the teaching which has manifestly a twofold meaning. The first is physical, and concerns the bodily position of the student and the regulation of breathing. These things have their direct influence upon soul life, the life of the spiritual man, since it is always and everywhere true that our study demands a sound mind in a sound body. The present sentence declares that, for work and for meditation, the position of the body must be steady and without strain, in order that the finer currents of life may run their course. It applies further to the poise of the soul, that fine balance and stability which nothing can shake, where the consciousness rests on the firm foundation of spiritual being. This is indeed the house set upon a rock, which the winds and waves beat upon in vain. Sutra 47. Right poise is to be gained by steady and temperate effort, and by setting the heart upon the everlasting. Here again there is the twofold meaning. For physical poise is to be gained by steady effort of the muscles, by gradual and wise training, linked with a right understanding of, and relation with, the universal force of gravity. Uprightness of body demands that both these conditions shall be fulfilled. In like manner, the firm and upright poise of the spiritual man is to be gained by steady and continued effort, always guided by wisdom, and by setting the heart on the eternal, filling the soul with the atmosphere of the spiritual world. Neither is effective without the other. Aspiration without effort brings weakness. Effort without aspiration brings a false strength, not resting on enduring things. The two together make for the right poise which sets the spiritual man firmly and steadfastly on his feet. Sutra 48. The fruit of right poise is the strength to resist the shocks of infatuation or sorrow. In the simpler physical sense, which is also covered by the wording of the original, this sentence means that wise effort establishes such bodily poise that the accidents of life cannot disturb it, as the captain remains steady though disaster overtake his ship. But the deeper sense is far more important. The spiritual man, too, must learn to withstand all shocks, to remain steadfast through the perturbations of external things and the storms and whirlwinds of the psychical world. This is the power which is gained by wise, continuous effort, and by filling the spirit with the atmosphere of the eternal. Sutra 49. When this is gained, there follows the right guidance of the life currents, the control of the incoming and outgoing breath. It is well understood today that most of our maladies come from impure conditions of the blood. It is coming to be understood that right breathing, right oxygenation, will do very much to keep the blood clean and pure. Therefore, a right knowledge of breathing is a part of the science of life. But the deeper meaning is that the spiritual man, when he has gained poise through right effort and aspiration, can stand firm, and guide the currents of his life, both the incoming current of events and the outgoing current of his acts. Exactly the same symbolism is used in the saying, "Not that which goeth into the mouth defileth a man, but that which cometh out of the mouth, this defileth a man." Those things which proceed out of the mouth come forth from the heart. Out of the heart proceed evil thoughts, murders, uncleanness, thefts, false witness, blasphemies. Therefore, the first step in purification is to keep the commandments. Sutra 50. The life current is either outward or inward or balanced. It is regulated according to place, time, number. It is prolonged and subtle. The technical, physical side of this has its value. In the breath, there should be right in-breathing, followed by the period of pause, when the air comes into contact with the blood, and this again followed by right out-breathing, even, steady, silent. Further, the lungs should be evenly filled. Many maladies may arise from the neglect and consequent weakening of some region of the lungs. And the number of breaths is so important, so closely related to health, that every nurse's chart records it. but the deeper meaning is concerned with the currents of life, with that which goeth into and cometh out of the heart. Sutra 51. The fourth degree transcends external and internal objects. The inner meaning seems to be that, in addition to the 3 degrees of control already described, control that is, over the incoming current of life, over the outgoing current, and over the condition of pause or quiescence, there is a 4th degree of control, which holds in complete mastery both the outer passage of events and the inner current of thoughts and emotions, a condition of perfect poise and stability in the midst of the flux of things outward and inward. Sutra 52. Thereby is worn away the veil which covers up the light. The veil is the psychic nature, the web of emotions, desires, argumentative trains of thought, which cover up and obscure the truth by absorbing the entire attention and keeping the consciousness in the psychic realm. When hopes and fears are reckoned at their true worth, in comparison with lasting possessions of the soul, when the outer reflections of things have ceased to distract us from inner realities, when argumentative thought no longer entangles us, but yields its place to flashing intuition, the certainty which springs from within, then is the veil worn away. The consciousness is drawn from the psychical to the spiritual, from the temporal to the eternal. Then is the light unveiled. Sutra 53. Thence comes the mind's power to hold itself in the light. It has been well said that what we most need is the faculty of spiritual attention. And in the same direction of thought, it has been eloquently declared that prayer does not consist in our catching God's attention, but rather in our allowing God to hold our attention. The vital matter is that we need to disentangle our consciousness from the noisy and perturbed thraldom of the psychical, and to come to consciousness as the spiritual man. This we must do first by purification, through the commandments and the rules, and second, through the faculty of spiritual attention, by steadily heeding endless fine intimations of the spiritual power within us, and by intending our consciousness thereto, thus by degrees transferring the center of consciousness from the psychical to the spiritual. It is a question first of love, and then of attention. Sutra 54. The right withdrawal is the disengaging of the powers from entanglement in outer things, as the psychic nature has been withdrawn and stilled. To understand this, let us reverse the process, and think of the one consciousness, centered in the soul, gradually expanding and taking on the form of the different perceptive powers, the one will at the same time differentiating itself into the varied powers of action. Now, let us imagine this to be reversed, so that the spiritual force, which has gone into the differentiated powers, is once more gathered together into the inner power of intuition and spiritual will, taking on that unity which is the hallmark of spiritual things, as diversity is the seal of material things. It is all a matter of love for the quality of spiritual consciousness, as against psychical consciousness, of love and attention. For where the heart is, there will the treasure be also. Where the consciousness is, there will the vesture with its powers be developed. Sutra 55. Thereupon follows perfect mastery over the powers. When the spiritual condition which we have described is reached, with its purity, poise, and illuminated vision, the spiritual man is coming into his inheritance and gaining complete mastery of his powers. Indeed, much of the struggle to keep the commandments and the rules has been paving the way for this mastery. Through this very struggle and sacrifice, the mastery has become possible, just as, to use St. Paul's simile, the athlete gains the mastery in the contest and the race through the sacrifice of his long and arduous training. Thus he gains the crown. End of Book 2 of the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, the Book of the Spiritual Man. An interpretation by Charles Johnston. Recording by Maggie Russell, New York, New York. Introduction to Book 3 of the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, the Book of the Spiritual Man. An interpretation by Charles Johnston. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Maggie Russell, New York, New York. The Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, the Book of the Spiritual Man. An interpretation by Charles Johnston. Introduction to Book 3. The third book of the Sutras is the Book of Spiritual Powers. In considering these spiritual powers, two things must be understood and kept in memory. The first of these is this. These spiritual powers can only be gained when the development described in the first and second books has been measurably attained, when the commandments have been kept, the rules faithfully followed, and the experiences which are described have been passed through. For only after this is the spiritual man so far grown, so far disentangled from the psychical bandages and veils which have confined and blinded him, that he can use his proper powers and faculties. For this is the secret of all spiritual powers. They are in no sense an abnormal or supernatural overgrowth upon the material man, but are rather the powers and faculties inherent in the spiritual man, entirely natural to him, and coming naturally into activity as the spiritual man is disentangled and liberated from psychical bondage, through keeping the commandments and rules already set forth. As the personal man is the limitation and inversion of the spiritual man, all his faculties and powers are inversions of the powers of the spiritual man. In a single phrase, his self-seeking is the inversion of the self-seeking, which is the very being of the spiritual man, the ceaseless search after the divine and august self of all beings. This inversion is corrected by keeping the commandments and rules, and gradually, as the inversion is overcome, the spiritual man is extricated, and comes into possession and free exercise of his powers. The spiritual powers, therefore, are the powers of the grown and liberated spiritual man. They can only be developed and used as the spiritual man grows and attains liberation through obedience. This is the first thing to be kept in mind in all that is said of spiritual powers in the third and fourth books of the Sutras. The second thing to be understood and kept in mind is this. Just as our modern sages have discerned and taught that all matter is ultimately one and eternal, definitely related throughout the whole wide universe, just as they have discerned and taught that all force is one and eternal, so coordinated throughout the whole universe that whatever affects any atom measurably affects the whole boundless realm of matter and force, to the most distant star or nebula on the dim confines of space. So the ancient sages had discerned and taught that all consciousness is one, immortal, indivisible, infinite, so finely correlated and continuous that whatever is perceived by any consciousness is, whether actually or potentially, within the reach of all consciousness, and therefore within the reach of any consciousness. This has been well expressed by saying that all souls are fundamentally one with the Oversoul, that the Son of God and all sons of God are fundamentally one with the Father. When the consciousness is cleared of psychic bonds and veils, when the spiritual man is able to stand, to see, then this superb law comes into effect.
Thanks for watching, guys. If you want to talk about anything, please let me know. Please feel free to like, follow, subscribe. Thanks. Yeah, this is very, very peaceful and essential. Thank you.
This is the birthright of the spiritual man. Through it he comes